The first reading is from Isaiah 55, beginning at verse 10. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace, and the mountains and hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Instead of the thorn bush will grow the pine tree, and instead of briars, the myrtle will grow. This will be for the Lord's renown, for an everlasting sign which will not be destroyed. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Whakarongo ti kia kupu a te wairua a ki te hahi. Thanks be to God. The Holy Gospel from St. Luke, chapter 6, beginning at verse 33. Praise and glory to God. Sorry. He also told them this parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye," when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. I'm sorry. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For out of the overflow of his heart, his mouth speaks. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not say what I say? I will show you what he is like who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. He is like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on the rock. When the flood came, the torrents struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. This is the gospel of Christ. Te rongapai te tēnei a te karaiti. Christ the Lord.
Sorry. So actually, we're not going to be talking about what the reading said, because I did only find out at 7 o'clock last night that I was speaking today. So even though they are really great readings, I thought I wouldn't stress myself out by trying to quickly write something. So I'm actually going to share with you guys a message that I've shared, not here before, but at the cathedral for the youth service. So it does have a bit of a youth flavored focus. So you might just need to think back to when you were young, and I'm sure we're all young at heart. But yeah, that is the kind of vibe of the my talk this morning. But I think you guys will be all good with that. If you were here last time I spoke, I shared about how I watched the video back and I was a bit concerned because I had my T-Rex arms going. Well, I watched back the other one that I spoke at and my arms were wide and big and I didn't look quite so much like a dinosaur. So I feel like I'm improving in that area. So hopefully this week it's even better than that. So my theme this morning is ordinary radicals. And I think so often in life we can look at people who have done great things and we think, how could I ever do that? Or how could that ever be me? And this morning I want to look a little bit deeper into the disciple named John, and then a couple of people who have lived ordinary radical lives. So in the Bible, it explains how the disciples actually came to be part of Jesus' crew, kind of his posse, I guess. In Matthew, it says, Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, and he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were busy doing their job fishing. And Jesus said to them, "Come, follow me." At once they left their nets and followed Jesus. They walked a bit further and they saw James and John, who were in a boat with their father, Zebedee, preparing to go out fishing. It says he called them and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. And I've often thought about that and I've thought, I wonder if there's more to that story, if they went home and they talked to their mum or, did they actually literally just put down their nets and say, "See you, Dad, I'm off." And I did a little bit of research into it because I just thought, I don't know, I wonder if there's more to that story. So John was just a regular guy working in the family business. And one afternoon, he became what they call a talmidim. So a talmidim they were basically students, like apprentices. And a talmid would seek out a teacher, so a rabbi that he could listen to and learn the scriptures and the law from and how to put them into practice. And this skill was taught orally. So they didn't write it down. So these guys, these rabbi, would know the entire first 5 books of the Bible off by heart. Now I kind of have, I don't know, probably 10 or so verses that I've memorized over my time. I actually do know all the books in the Bible. Does anyone else know all the books? Who learned a song when they were little? Yeah, I too learned a song. A couple of different ones actually, and I could sing it later on if anyone wants me to after the service. I could do my party trick and say all the books in the Bible. But they knew the first 5 books of the Bible off by heart. So when a talmidim found a teacher he wanted to learn from, he would ask if he could follow him. And Jesus was a very prominent figure in Galilee. He was very well educated, and we know this by the fact that he was called a rabbi. So rabbi wasn't a term that was just used for anyone. It was a pretty special term used for a special person. So if a rabbi approached a talmidim, I may be saying that wrong, sorry, rather than the other way around and said to him, "Follow me," it was a pretty big deal because it meant that rabbi believed the potential that the Talmud had and the ability and commitment that person had to become like him. So if we'll draw some analogies, if you think, imagine a Wall Street broker, if they were to approach a boy with hot dogs on a hot dog stand and say, "I want to make you my apprentice." Or if a university professor were to approach a random kid who hadn't even finished year 9 and said that he'll sponsor him to get his PhD. That's kind of the equivalent, I guess, of what happened here. So this is essentially what Jesus did. He went up to John and his older brother and he said, "Come and follow me." And it was such an honor that a rabbi would approach them that they literally just dropped their nets and they left their dad and they hung out with Jesus for the next 3 years. In the Bible, it doesn't actually say how old any of the disciples were, but the scholars have researched this and read and worked out how old they think they were. So generally speaking, Talmud began their teaching in their mid-teens. So some of the disciples had other professions, like Matthew was a tax collector, so he was probably older. But Andrew, Peter, James, and John were fishermen, just ordinary guys doing ordinary things that ended up having an extraordinary life because they chose to follow Jesus. They said yes to Jesus. So what about John? What do we know about him? Well, the research indicates that he was actually probably the youngest disciple, and he was probably about 16 when he started following Jesus. So I don't think I can see anyone in the room that's 16. Malachi is probably the closest. He's 15 and a half, almost. So imagine Malachi, or if anyone has a 16-year-old son or grandson, that a really well-known pastor or vicar, like let's just picture maybe the bishop, maybe Bishop Justin, came up to you while you were gardening at home with Tama and said, come and follow me. And you just drop your weed eater and said, see you, Dad, I'm off to follow the bishop. That's kind of what it would be like. Would be a little bit unusual, wouldn't it? Not commonplace now, and I'm not too sure how commonplace it would be then. Later on, John is described in the Bible as the one whom Jesus loved. And while Jesus was actually up on the cross, he asked John to take care of his mum. So obviously he really loved John despite his age, and he trusted him completely. So John, the 16-year-old young man-child, got to experience Jesus, the miracles, the teaching, the prayers, the first Pentecost, everything. That is an ordinary radical guy right there. Have any of you ever read the book or heard about a young woman named Malala? Some of you have, yep. So Malala is a Pakistani young woman who was an ordinary girl who ended up living a pretty radical life. So in 2008, the BBC came up with a very creative way of covering all the terror that was going on in Pakistan at that time due to the Taliban. They decided to ask a schoolgirl to blog anonymously about her life there, and Malala agreed to write the blog. She was only 11 years old at the time, and so on the 3rd of January in 2009, her first entry was posted to the BBC Urdu blog. She handwrote notes and she passed them to a reporter who scanned them and emailed them in, and the blog recorded her thoughts during the first battle of SWAT. So this is as the military occupations took place and fewer girls started showing up to school, and finally her school actually got shut down. And that day she wrote, "I had a terrible dream yesterday with military helicopters and the Taliban. I have had such dreams since the launch of the military operation in SWAT. My mother made me breakfast and I went off to school. I was afraid of going to school because the Taliban had issued an edict banning all girls from attending school. Only 11 out of 27 pupils attended the class because the number decreased because of the Pakistani Taliban's edict. The Pakistani Taliban had set an order that no girls could attend school after the 15th of January 2009. They had already blown up more than 100 girls' schools. She continued to write the blog, and excerpts were published in a local newspaper. And as sort of a couple of years went by and things continued, Malala she started to become recognized. I think they started to work out who she was because of things that she was saying. And the danger in her life increased. She kept sharing what was happening, and she actively spoke out about the need for young women to be able to receive an education. Then death threats started happening, and they were actually published in newspapers and they were slipped under her door. And on Facebook, where she was an active user, she began to receive threats. And in a meeting held in the summer of 2012, the Taliban leaders unanimously agreed to kill her. So on October the 9th, 2012, a Taliban gunman shot Malala as she rode home on a bus after taking an exam in Pakistani Swat Valley, and she was 15 years old at the time. So it had been quite a long time that she'd been sharing her story. Miraculously, she survived and continued her campaign. And on the 10th of October 2014, Malala was announced as the co-recipient of the 2014 Nobel Peace Prize for her struggle against the suppression of children and young people and for the right of all children to an education. She received the prize at 17, and she is the youngest Nobel Prize laureate. She still continues to be an activist, and I'm just going to read to you part of her message when she was invited to speak at the church of Martin Luther King. Has anyone been to that church? My mum's been to that church. She said it's pretty amazing. I grew up, this is Malala, just part of the message that she shared on that Sunday morning. I grew up in a small town in Pakistan, a Muslim nation. As a child, I didn't know what a Christian life would be like or what a Jewish life would be like. In the last few years, I have met many people of different faiths from different countries. I have seen the world beyond the mountains of my home in Swat Valley. I know that the world is big, beautiful, and diverse. I know that we all have different ways to worship, but we share the same hope for peace, the same love for our sisters and brothers. It was my faith that helped me stand up to extremists and forgive the man who shot me. And it was your faith that led a son of this great church to fight for equality in his own country. As a child, I learned in my school books how Dr. Martin Luther King reminded the world of basic values we should all share: to respect the humanity of every man, woman, and child, to love even our enemies, and to work for peace at home and around the world. And I'm just going to put in brackets, that's so relevant, isn't it, after what's happened this week. This morning, I visited the old church and the King Centre and understand more clearly some of the history I read about in my books. 50 years to the day after Dr. King received the Nobel Peace Prize, I received the same award. I hope to honour his legacy that day and every day. Dr. King raised his voice to change the world, and he did. With my voice, I hope to do the same for 130 million girls who are out of school today. That's pretty incredible stuff. She was just an ordinary schoolgirl who believed in something so passionately, she was prepared to risk her life to fight for the cause. And I think probably when I think of the term ordinary radical, I think of one of the disciples, or Malala, or Greta Thunberg. See, these references are all young people, so we could put in someone from your age demographic there, just pop that person into your mind. And for some of us, I guess that might be our path. For some of your children and your grandchildren, I'm sure that you will look one day to see what they might achieve, and you might be like, oh, I know that person. But for some of us, ordinary radical action might be so ordinary that we don't even realize what it does. And this happened for our daughter Grace. Grace is our oldest daughter, and she lives in Auckland now, but she studied at university in Wellington. So when Grace, all the way through primary school and high school and then university, Grace was friends with a guy called Jack. And Jack didn't grow up in a Christian home. He had a bit of a tricky home life with a single mum who tragically passed away when he was in primary school from meningitis. And when Grace moved to Wellington to study, Jack also came down this way, and they were both at different hostels, but they did some of the same classes, and they were good friends, and they hung out. And I can remember her telling me that she'd invited Jack to church. She went to the street in Wellington, and she was so excited because he went with her. And I can also remember her telling me how excited she was when he started going or continued to go, even when she couldn't make it. Fast forward a few years, Jack ended up going to a different church, one that fitted him, and Grace received this message. And I asked Jack if he was all right with me sharing it, and he said Absolutely. Hey, Grace, I just wanted to message you. Going to the street today was so nice, and I just wanted to thank you. Pretty much, I went and thanked Nick and Sarah, they were the pastors at the street, for creating and building leaders who were bold enough to go out and bring people to God. Without you, I never would have entered into church properly, also by the grace of God. But without you being bold to ask me to come, I wouldn't be where I am now. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I just had my first week as a youth pastor intern, and it was insane. How incredible is that? That is ordinary radicalism in action, isn't it? Just an ordinary young person inviting another ordinary young person to church. And now his life has been completely transformed by the power of Jesus. And he's chosen to become a youth pastor so that he can be part of the transformation story for other young people. I just think that's amazing. So I guess this morning I want to encourage you and to challenge you that we are all ordinary people, but will we be radical enough to be like John and put down our nets and follow Jesus when he says, follow me? Or to be like Malala and take action about an issue that we're passionate about? Or even just to be like Grace and invite a friend who doesn't know Jesus to church? Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for the examples in the Bible of ordinary people living extraordinary lives by following you, by saying yes to you. We just ask Jesus in our own life that you give us opportunities where we can be ordinary radicals, where we can be sharing the message of hope, of grace and of love, of everything that you have to offer us. We thank you for Jack. We thank you, people don't know Jack, but we just thank you for Jack and what Jack represents. You know, the next generation of people that want to go out and transform New Zealand. We thank you for the people in our lives that we know that are saying yes to you and want to go out and transform their communities. Amen.